Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the key to restoring the lost Kryptonian civilization. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for Izuku Midoriya, was a symphony of roaring power that he could only ever listen to from outside the concert hall. It was in the crackle of static electricity that clung to his best friend, his tormentor, Katsuki Bakugo's palms. It was in the casual way a classmate could elongate their fingers to snatch a dropped pen. It was in the very air of Mizudafu, a city built and rebuilt by giants and speedsters, a metropolis that hummed with the constant, thrumming energy of the superhuman. His own existence was a profound, unending silence in the midst of that symphony. The morning began, as it always did, with the golden, smiling face of All Might. His alarm clock, a special edition that shouted, "I am here to start your day," in the hero's booming voice, was the first sound to pierce his sleep. Izuku's room was less a bedroom and more a shrine. Posters of the symbol of peace in various triumphant poses papered the walls, his silver-aged costume a beacon of primary-colored hope against the beige wallpaper. Figurines stood in neat, heroic lines on his shelves, their plastic capes frozen mid-billow. He dressed quickly, his mind already racing. The news was on in the living room, a report about a minor villain takedown downtown by the rising hero Kamui Woods. Izuku was already muttering, his chopsticks hovering over his rice and fish as his mother, Inko, placed a bowl of miso soup before him. And his lacquered chain prison is effective for containment, but it shows a weakness to wide-area brute force attacks. If he were paired with someone like Empty Lady, their synergy would be incredible for urban environments, but her collateral damage potential is a major liability in densely populated zones, which is probably why their agencies haven't pursued a long-term partnership. He needs someone with focused power, maybe like Izuku honey, Inko said gently, her voice a soft counterpoint to his frantic analysis. Breathe. And eat your breakfast before it gets cold, he blinked, snapping out of his trance. A flush of embarrassment crept up his neck. Sorry, Mom, she smiled, a small, sad smile he knew all too well. It was the smile that said, I love your passion, but I worry it will only break your heart. He hated that smile more than anything. School was the true test of his endurance. Aldera Junior High was a microcosm of their society, a clear, brutal hierarchy based on the flash and power of one's quirk. At the very bottom of that hierarchy, in a tier all his own, was Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless. The final bell of the day was a signal for release for most. For Izuku, it was the starting pistol for the day's main event of torment. He was packing his bag, meticulously sliding his most prized possession, hero analysis for the future, number 13, into his backpack when a familiar, explosive voice cut through the classroom chatter. Still not done, Deku? Izuku froze. He didn't have to look up to know who it was. The scent of burnt sugar and nitroglycerin was Katsuki Bakugo's signature. He stood there, flanked by his two usual cronies, his posture a study in arrogant disregard. His crimson eyes, so often narrowed in a predator's glare, were fixed on the worn, slightly singed cover of Izuku's notebook. We're not done here yet, Bakugo drawled, snatching the notebook from Izuku's hands before he could react. Hey! Give it back, Kaken! It's mine! Izuku's protest was weak, a mouse squeaking at a dragon. Hero analysis for the future? One of Bakugo's lackeys snickered, reading the title over his shoulder. Seriously? You're still on this pathetic stuff? Bakugo flipped through the pages, his expression a mixture of contempt and disgust. He saw the detailed drawings, the notes on quirks, the hypothetical support gear, the tactical breakdowns. It was the work of a brilliant, dedicated mind. And to Bakugo, it was the most infuriating thing in the world. All this obsessive scribbling, Bakugo said, his voice dangerously low. It's like you're stalking them. It's creepy. You're a quirkless wannabe who thinks he can stand on the same stage as me. He slammed the notebook shut between his palms. A small, sharp crackle echoed in the quiet room. Smoke, thick and acrid, began to curl from between his fingers. Kaken, no! Stop it! Izuku cried, reaching out, a desperate, futile gesture. Boom! A small, contained explosion erupted from Bakugo's hand. The notebook, his notebook, the culmination of months of work, was blasted, charred and smoking, out the open window. Izuku watched it fall, a black, pathetic comet, and land with a soft plop in the koi pond below. A profound silence filled the space where his hope had been. Bakugo dusted his hands off. "You know, Deku," he said, a malicious smile twisting his lips as he placed a smoking hand on Izuku's shoulder, the heat searing through the thin fabric of his uniform. "If you want a quirk so bad, there's a really quick way to get one. Just take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with one in your next life." The words hit Izuku harder than any explosion. He stood, trembling, as Bakugo and his friends sauntered out of the classroom, their laughter echoing down the hall. He didn't retaliate. He didn't shout. He just stood there, a ghost in his own life, the phantom smell of burnt paper filling his nostrils. He retrieved the notebook from the pond later. It was a soggy, blackened mess. The ink had run, the pages were fused together by heat and water. He clutched it to his chest, tears finally welling in his eyes, hot and silent. Bakugo's words echoed in his head. Swan dive off the roof. Did he really mean it? A part of him, the small, terrified part that had lived in the shadow of Bakugo's power for a decade, knew he probably didn't. It was just Bakugo being Bakugo. But the words still cut, leaving a deep, festering wound. He couldn't go home. Not like this. He couldn't face his mother's worried eyes, couldn't bear to add another crack to her already fragile heart. He needed to be alone. He needed a place where no one else would want to be. His feet, moving on autopilot, carried him towards the coast. Not the pristine, tourist-friendly beaches, but the forgotten stretch of shoreline known as the Goba Municipal Beach Park. It had once been a beautiful cove, but years of illegal dumping and neglect, fueled by ocean currents, had turned it into a monumental landfill. Mountains of rusted appliances, tangled nets, broken furniture, and discarded plastics formed grotesque sculptures against the setting sun. The air was thick with the smell of brine, rust, and decay. It was perfect. A junkyard for a boy who felt like human junk. He trudged through the sand, which was more grit and grime than shell and stone, and found a spot near a teetering pile of washing machines. He sat, the soggy remains of his notebook in his lap. The sun was a brilliant orange disk, sinking into the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the garbage-strewn landscape. The waves crashed against the shore with a tired, rhythmic sigh. For a long time, he just sat there, hollowed out. All Might's words from an old interview played in his mind. Anyone can be a hero, as long as they have a heroic heart. It had been his mantra, his lifeline. But was it true? Could a heart, no matter how heroic, stop a villain? Could it save someone from a collapsing building? Could it even stand up to a childhood bully? Frustration, a white-hot, bitter emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel, surged through him. It was a feeling of utter, absolute powerlessness. He kicked out at a pile of scrap metal and plastic bags. "It's not fair," he whispered to the uncaring sea. "It's just not fair." The pile shifted from his kick. A broken microwave tumbled down, followed by a cascade of smaller items. And then, something caught the last rays of the dying sun. It wasn't the dull glint of rusted metal or the cheap sheen of plastic. It was a deep, complex light, a darkness that seemed to swallow the orange glow and turn it into something else entirely. Curiosity piqued, Izuku scrambled over. Half buried in the sand and grime was an object unlike anything he had ever seen. It was about the size of his fist, shaped like a smooth, elongated stone, but its material was bizarre. It was a deep, obsidian black, yet it wasn't reflective like glass. Instead, it seemed to absorb the light around it. Swirling through its dark depths were intricate, silver-gray patterns, like galaxies trapped in ice. They shifted and flowed as he moved his head, giving the object an impossible sense of internal movement. He reached out and brushed the sand off its surface. The moment his fingertips made contact, a strange sensation shot up his arm. It wasn't an electric shock, nor was it hot or cold. It was a hum, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to bypass his ears and sink directly into his bones. And with it, a gentle, pervasive warmth spread from his fingers, chasing away the evening chill. It felt ancient. It felt welcoming. He dug it out of the sand. It was heavier than it looked, solid and unyielding. There were no seams, no buttons, no indication of it being a piece of technology. It just felt like a perfectly formed, impossible stone. In a world of chrome and circuitry, this object felt organic and alien at the same time. For the first time all day, the crushing weight on his chest lifted slightly. He had found something unique, something that wasn't part of the hero-villain world that constantly reminded him of his own inadequacy. It was a secret. His secret. A small, beautiful thing found in a place of forgotten trash. He slipped the strange, warm crystal into his pocket, its gentle thrum a comforting presence against his leg. Holding the ruined notebook in one hand, he began the long walk home, the encounter with Bakugo already feeling a little more distant, overshadowed by the quiet mystery now resting in his pocket. The route home took him under a familiar overpass. He was so lost in thought, replaying the day's events, that he didn't notice the sound until it was too late. A wet, gurgling slosh from the manhole cover behind him. A medium-sized vessel, perfect, Izuku whirled around. A monster made of green, viscous sludge was pouring out of the sewer, too manic, floating eyes bobbing in its semi-liquid form. A villain. A real villain. His mind, the analytical part that never shut off, immediately went into overdrive. Fluid body, likely resistant to physical attacks. Vulnerable to, he never finished the thought. The sludge monster lunged, a tidal wave of filth and desperation. Don't worry, kid. I'm just hijacking your body. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. The sludge enveloped him. It was thick, cloying, and suffocating. It forced its way into his mouth, his nostrils. His lungs burned for air he couldn't get. He clawed at the mass, his fingers sinking into the disgusting fluid with no effect. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. This was it. He was going to die here, suffocating in a sewer tunnel, his last thoughts being of his ruined notebook and his mother's worried face. No. I don't want to die. The thought was a primal scream in his mind. He thrashed, his legs kicking uselessly. His vision began to blur, black spots dancing at the edges. Somebody, anybody, a hero. As his consciousness began to fade, a new sensation pierced through the fog of his panic. The crystal in his pocket. The gentle warmth it had been emitting suddenly flared into an intense, searing heat. It wasn't burning him, but the energy pouring from it was immense, a silent supernova against his skin. A faint, emerald green light seeped through the fabric of his pants, a glow invisible beneath the murky green of the sludge villain. Izuku felt a surge of something, not strength, but a feeling of sheer, unadulterated potential. It was a bolt of pure will, a desperate, hopeless refusal to surrender. His life, his dreams, his promise to his mom, his unwavering belief in the ideal of a hero, all of it coalesced into a single, blinding point of desperation. And in that moment, the Genesis Codex responded. A microscopic filament, thinner than a human hair and woven from solidified light and data, extended from the surface of the crystal. It pierced the fabric of his pocket, then his skin. The prick was instantaneous, less than a pinprick, a single spark of pain completely lost in the agony of suffocation and the blaze of adrenaline. The filament connected to his nervous system, a key finding its lock. A torrent of information, the genetic blueprint of an entire civilization, began to pour into the corkless, receptive DNA of Izuku Midoriya. He didn't know any of this. All he knew was a final, desperate surge of will before a tremendous clang echoed from the manhole cover. Have no fear, kid! A titanic voice boomed. For I am here, All Might. The sludge villain recoiled in terror. All Might? What are you doing here? A gale-force wind ripped through the underpass. Texas smash! The pressure change was instantaneous and overwhelming. The sludge villain was blasted apart, splattered against the concrete walls. Izuku fell to the ground, gasping, coughing, his lungs aching as they filled with sweet, precious air. The world was a spinning, blurry mess. The last thing he saw before passing out was the towering silhouette of his idol, backlit by the afternoon sun. When he awoke, it was to a series of light, rapid taps on his cheek. Hey! Hey, kid! Wake up! Thank goodness, Izuku's eyes fluttered open. All Might, in all his glory, was kneeling beside him. It was surreal. The hero was bigger, brighter, more real than any poster or video clip. "Oh man, I'm glad you're okay," All Might said, his signature smile firmly in place. "Sorry I let you get caught up in my villain hunt. I'm new to this city, and it's been a bit of an adjustment." He laughed, a sound like rolling thunder. He held up a soda bottle, now containing the swirling, angry eyes of the captured sludge villain. "But fear not, for I have captured the evildoer." Izuku was starstruck. He scrambled for his backpack, for his notebook. "An autograph! Please, can I have an autograph? Where's my pen? Oh, here's my notebook. It's a little soggy and burnt, but..." He flipped it open to a blank page and saw it was already signed. A huge, confident signature from the #1 hero. Thank you so much. This will be a family heirloom," he stammered, bowing repeatedly. All Might gave him a thumbs up. "All right, kid. I've got to get this guy to the police. Stay safe." He crouched, preparing to leap. Wait. Izuku's mind screamed. This was it. This was his one chance. The question that had burned in his soul for 10 years. I have to ask him. As All Might launched himself into the air, Izuku, in a move of pure, unthinking madness, latched onto his leg. The flight was terrifying and exhilarating. The wind ripped at him, and All Might's panicked attempts to get him to let go were a blur. They landed roughly on a nearby rooftop, the city spread out below them like a map. "Young man, that was incredibly reckless," All Might scolded, though his anger was quickly replaced by something else, as he saw the look on Izuku's face. The hero suddenly deflated, steam pouring from his body as he shrank down into a skeletal, haggard man with sunken eyes. Izuku stared in horror. The reveal of All Might's secret, his terrible injury, his time limit, it all came pouring out. It was a truth far more crushing than anything Bakugo could ever say. His idol, the unshakable pillar of society, was fragile. He was fading, and so, with his last shred of hope, Izuku asked the question. The one he had traveled all this way to ask. "Even without a quirk, can I still be a hero? Can someone who's quirkless be like you?" He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the answer he had always feared. He told All Might everything, the diagnosis, the bullying, the constant feeling of being left behind. He talked about how, even in the face of the sludge villain, his body just moved. How he wanted to save people with a smile, just like him. All Might was silent for a long moment. He looked at the boy before him, scrawny, trembling, but with a fire in his eyes that no amount of hardship had been able to extinguish. He saw the desperation, the raw, unfiltered desire to do good. He saw the heart of a true hero beating in the chest of a quirkless child. And he remembered his own past, his own master's words. He looked at Izuku, and a true, genuine smile touched his lips. "Young man," he said, his voice quiet but filled with a strength that had nothing to do with muscles. "You can be a hero." The world stopped. For Izuku, it was as if the sun had finally broken through a decade of storm clouds. Tears streamed down his face, not of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated joy. The 7 most powerful words in the universe had just been spoken to him, by the one person whose opinion mattered most. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing with relief. All Might put a comforting hand on his shoulder. It was a gesture of succession, though either of them knew the full extent of it yet. As the emotional torrent began to subside, an explosion rocked the city in the distance. All Might cursed, realizing the villain he had captured must have escaped when Izuku clung to him. He rushed to the edge of the roof, his body protesting the strain. "It's my fault," Izuku whispered, horrified. They watched the chaos unfold. The villain had found a new host. A hostage with an explosive quirk. It was Bakugo. Izuku's blood ran cold. The scene played out just as it had in the outline of his life, heroes standing by, their quirks ill-suited to the situation. Bakugo was struggling, suffocating, just as he had been, and then Izuku's eyes met Bakugo's across the distance. He saw the desperation, the fear, the plea for help in the eyes of the boy who had told him to kill himself just hours earlier, and his legs started moving. He ran. Past the police barricades, past the stunned heroes. He ran towards the inferno, towards the monster that had almost killed him. He had no plan. He had no power. He only had the instinct of a hero, his backpack. He remembered his notebook. Throwing your bag is a good way to create a distraction, and by a few seconds. He swung his heavy backpack and hurled it with all his might. It struck the villain in one of its sensitive eyes, causing the creature to recoil for a precious instant. In that instant, Izuku was there, clawing at the sludge, trying to free Bakugo's face. "Kaken, what are you doing here, you damn Deku?" Bakugo roared, his pride warring with his terror. "My legs just started moving," Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face. "I couldn't just stand there and watch you die." His selfless, reckless, utterly heroic act shamed the other heroes and, more importantly, it inspired the one who mattered most. "I am such a hypocrite," Toshinori Yagi thought, his body beginning to steam as he forced it past its limits. "I tell this boy he can be a hero, and then I stand here and do nothing." Power surged through him. "I really am pathetic," All Might roared, his muscle form reappearing in a burst of steam and will. He appeared in a flash, grabbing Izuku and batting away the villain's attack. Detroit Smash! His punch was a hurricane. The air pressure changed so dramatically that it began to rain. The villain was scattered, Bakugo was freed, and the day was saved. The aftermath was a blur of noise and light. The other heroes praised Bakugo for his bravery and powerful quirk. They scolded Izuku for his recklessness, his foolishness. He stood there, head bowed, accepting their rebukes. He knew they were right. He hadn't actually done anything. He had just gotten in the way. The feeling of dejection returned, a heavy cloak settling over his shoulders. As he walked home, the setting sun casting long shadows, Bakugo confronted him. "Deku!" he yelled. "I didn't need your help. I had it handled. Don't you ever look down on me, you quirkless reject. I owe you nothing." He turned and stormed off, his pride a shield against the vulnerability he had shown. Izuku could only watch him go. "He's right. I couldn't save him. I couldn't do anything. I am here!" The booming voice came from around the corner. All Might, in his muscle form, skidded to a stop in front of Izuku. "Young man," he declared, "I came to thank you. And to correct the other pros. And to make a proposal." He looked at Izuku, his blue eyes burning with an intensity that had nothing to do with fame or power. "Of all the heroes on the scene today, you were the truest one. You, a quirkless, frightened boy, acted when we stood frozen. You possessed the heart of a hero." He then revealed his secret. His quirk, one for all. A sacred torch passed from one generation to the next. A crystallization of power that could be given to another. "I have been searching for a worthy successor," All Might said, his voice dropping to a serious, profound tone. "And I believe that successor is you, young Midoriya." Izuku stared, his mind unable to process the words. It was too much. The bullying, the beach, the crystal, the villain, the rooftop, the rescue, and now this. An offer that was not just a dream come true, but the shattering of every law of biology he had ever known. "My quirk," he stammered, tears welling up again. "You want to give me your quirk?" "Yes," All Might said, a huge smile on his face. "And I want you to be the next symbol of peace. What do you say?" Through his tears, Izuku nodded frantically, a single word escaping his lips. "Yes," All Might laughed, a full, hearty sound. "Excellent! A hero's journey is not an easy one. It starts with grueling, back-breaking training." He clapped Izuku on the back, a gesture of camaraderie and mentorship. It was in that moment, as All Might pulled his hand away from Izuku's shoulder, that he saw it. For the briefest of instants, less than a heartbeat, an intricate symbol glowed on the back of Izuku's hand. It was a faint, ethereal light, like bioluminescence under the skin. It wasn't green like the crackling energy he associated with One for All, but a soft, golden white. The design was alien, elegant, a stylized S-shape contained within a pentagonal shield, with graceful curls and flourishes. It flared into existence for a second, a ghost of an emblem, before vanishing completely, leaving behind only pale, unmarked skin. All Might blinked. "What was that?" he muttered, squinting at Izuku's hand. What was what?" Izuku asked, wiping his eyes, oblivious. Toshinori looked again. There was nothing there. He shook his head. Must have been a trick of the light. A reflection off a window as the sun sets. He was running on fumes, his body and mind exhausted. He was probably just seeing things. He dismissed it, focusing instead on the bright, hopeful future of the boy standing before him. Izuku walked the rest of the way home in a daze. The world was vibrant, painted in colors he had never noticed before. All Might's words replayed in his head on a continuous, glorious loop. You can be a hero. I want you to be my successor. He barely registered the familiar streets, the greetings of neighbors. He felt the weight of the strange crystal in his pocket, its warmth now returned to a gentle, comforting hum. He chalked up the earlier heat to his own panicked imagination. It was just a cool rock he had found, a good luck charm on the most important day of his life. The tiny, forgotten sting on his leg had long since faded. He reached his apartment, opened the door, and was greeted by the frantic, worried face of his mother. He gave her a watery, trembling smile. For the first time, it wasn't a smile to hide his pain. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated hope. Later that night, sitting in his room, the shrine to his idol felt different. It was no longer a monument to an impossible dream. It was a road map. It was his future. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass of his window. He was still the same scrawny, freckled Izuku. But something inside had shifted. A foundation had been laid. He was completely, blissfully unaware that this foundation was being built upon a deeper, far more ancient one. As he drifted off to sleep, his mind filled with images of training and heroism, the silent, microscopic work continued within him. The Kryptonian Genesis Codex, woven into his very cells, was cross-referencing, adapting, and rewriting. It was a quiet, cellular echo, preparing the quirkless boy's body for a power far beyond that of a single quirk. It was preparing him for the legacy of a dead star, and the burden of 11 billion souls. Outside, the yellow sun of Earth shone down, its radiation a gentle catalyst for the storm that was to come. Izuku Midoriya slept, dreaming of becoming a hero, never suspecting that he was already on the path to becoming a legend for two worlds. Sleep, when it finally came, was a shallow, restless thing. Izuku's mind, a chaotic storm of joy and disbelief, refused to be still. He kept replaying the scene with all might, the words echoing in his soul. You can be a hero. I want you to be my successor. It felt like the punchline to a decade-long cosmic joke, except it was real. The universe had spent 14 years telling him no, only to have its greatest champion shout yes directly into his heart. He was awake before his alarm clock had a chance to announce All Might's presence. The pre-dawn light was a soft, gray filter over his room, his collection of hero memorabilia looking like a silent, plastic army waiting for orders. He didn't feel tired. He felt electric. A current of pure, unadulterated purpose hummed just beneath his skin. This was the first day of the rest of his life. His morning routine was a blur of motion. He practically inhaled his breakfast, his mother watching him with a mixture of amusement and her ever-present worry. You're certainly full of energy this morning, Izuku, Inko commented, refilling his orange juice. I just feel good, Mom, he said, and it was the truest thing he had ever said. He wasn't lying, he wasn't hiding his pain. He felt fundamentally, seismically good. He spent the day in a fugue state. School was an irrelevant distraction, the taunts of his classmates were like raindrops on a battleship, and Bakugo's simmering glares felt distant and unimportant. He was on a different plane of existence now. His future wasn't here, in the cramped classrooms of Aldera Junior High. It was on a beach covered in junk, with the number one hero as his personal trainer. When he finally got home that evening, he went straight to his desk. He pulled out a fresh notebook, labeling it in neat, careful characters, Hero Analysis for My Future, Number 1. This one wasn't for observation, it was for application. He began to write, his pen flying across the page. One for all. A transferable quirk that stockpiles power. Inheritor must have a strong body, otherwise, limbs pop off. All Might's words. Need to focus on full body conditioning, not just isolated muscle groups. Tensile strength is key. What exercises maximize this? Plyometrics? Isometric holds? I need a full regimen. He was so absorbed in his work, in the glorious, tangible problem of how to become a worthy vessel, that he almost missed the first sign. It was a hum, a low, resonant frequency that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He paused, pen hovering over the paper. He thought it was the old fluorescent light in his ceiling fixture, which often buzzed when it was about to die. He tapped his pen, dismissed it, and went back to sketching out a potential 10-month workout schedule. The hum grew louder. It wasn't the high-pitched buzz of failing electronics. This was different. It was a deep, bass note that vibrated in his teeth, a thrum that seemed to settle in the center of his chest. His eyes scanned the room, searching for the source. His computer was off. His phone was silent. His gaze landed on the object sitting next to his monitor. The strange, black and silver crystal he found on the beach. It was the source. The deep, obsidian surface seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light, the silver galaxies within it swirling faster now, like a storm in a bottle. The gentle warmth he'd felt before was intensifying, radiating a palpable heat that made the air around it shimmer. Izuku stared, mesmerized and a little unnerved. He had forgotten about it in the whirlwind of the day's events. He reached out a hesitant hand, his fingers hovering just above its smooth surface. The vibrations were stronger here, a tangible force against his skin. "What are you?" he whispered. As if in answer, the crystal flared. A beam of pure, white light, as thin as a needle, shot out from its apex and struck the center of his bedroom ceiling. It didn't burn the plaster, it simply connected. The light spread out from the impact point, not like a projection, but like liquid mercury flowing into invisible channels. Lines of light crisscrossed his ceiling, forming complex geometric patterns and unfamiliar, elegant script that glowed with a soft, golden luminescence. Izuku stumbled back, knocking over his chair with a clatter. He stared, wide-eyed, as the patterns coalesced. The lines and symbols resolved themselves into a breathtaking, three-dimensional star map. Unfamiliar constellations, binary suns, and swirling nebulae of impossible color painted his ceiling. It was a view of the cosmos, but not one he had ever seen in any textbook. Dominating the center was a magnificent, colossal red sun, its light casting a somber, crimson glow throughout his room. He stood there, frozen in awe, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was not a toy. This was not some discarded piece of tech. This was something else. Something impossible. As he watched, the star map began to shift. The celestial bodies spun and swirled, the perspective pulling back at an incredible speed, as if flying through galaxies in seconds. Finally, it focused on a single point of light, a star system with a yellow sun, orbited by several planets. It zeroed in on the third planet from that sun. A familiar blue and white marble. Earth. Then, the star map dissolved, and a new image formed in its place. The same symbol he had seen, or thought he'd seen, on his own hand. A stylized S in a pentagonal shield. It hung in the air above him, glowing with a quiet, regal authority. It felt ancient, powerful, and filled with a profound sense of hope. A voice spoke, and it was not from a speaker. It echoed directly inside his mind, a sound made of static and thought, of ancient dust and starlight. System boot, diagnostic complete. Calibrating linguistic matrix. Japanese, regional dialect, Musutafu, confirmed. Commencing primary contact. The voice was calm, measured, but held an undercurrent of immense age. It was fragmented, like a recording pieced together from a million broken shards. Who are you? Izuku stammered, his voice barely a whisper. What is this? I am a remnant. A fragmented consciousness pattern from the neural engrams of Jor-El, chief scientist of the planet Krypton. This vessel you have found is a Genesis probe. Its purpose is preservation. Izuku's mind, a machine built for analysis, tried to grasp the words. Jor-El? Krypton? The names meant nothing to him. They were alien, bizarre. Alien? You're an alien? That is a relative term. To me, you are the alien. But yes. By your definition I am. My world is gone. It perished long ago, consumed by the instability of its core. This probe, and others like it, were sent out as an act of final, desperate hope. To find a new world where our people might live again. The holographic symbol above him pulsed gently. The red sun he had seen earlier reappeared, and he watched in horror as it swelled, convulsed, and then exploded in a silent, devastating cataclysm that sent fiery shockwaves across the star map. The beauty was terrifying. He was witnessing the death of a world. Your whole planet? Izuku asked, his voice thick with a sudden, unexpected grief. All of it. And all of its people. Save one. A single child, sent away in a prototype vessel. His fate is unknown to this archive. The voice paused, a flicker of something that might have been sadness rippling through its synthesized tones. But the essence of our people was preserved. Within this probe was housed the Kryptonian Genesis Codex. The Codex? It is not a book. It is a biological archive. The complete genetic sequence of every man, woman, and child of the Kryptonian race. The blueprint for 11 billion lives, their history, their potential, all encoded into a single, living stream of data. 11 billion. The number was incomprehensible. A population greater than the entire planet Earth, wiped out. And their ghosts were in this machine? Izuku's mind was reeling. He was talking to the ghost of a dead alien scientist from an exploded planet. It was the stuff of science fiction, not the life of a quirkless junior high student, but the glowing map on his ceiling, the humming crystal on his desk, the voice in his head. They were undeniably real. Okay, he said, trying to ground himself, to analyze. So, this probe contains the data for your entire civilization. Why is it activating now? Why is it talking to me? For centuries, this probe has lain dormant, its primary directive on a continuous loop: search and evaluate. It required a very specific set of criteria for a host vessel. A biological and psychological match. A host vessel? Izuku repeated, a cold dread beginning to pool in his stomach. The Codex cannot remain as mere data forever. To restore Krypton, it must be bonded with a living organism. One capable of integrating its complex structure without cellular rejection. For this, two conditions were paramount. The holographic display changed again. It showed a complex, swirling double helix of DNA. Then, beside it, another helix appeared, but this one was different. It had strange, glowing nodes and erratic, unstable-looking offshoots. The first criterion was biological. The host had to possess a baseline, unmutated genome. The dominant species of this planet has undergone widespread, chaotic genetic deviation. You call them quirks. These mutations, while powerful, create an inherent instability in the cellular structure. To introduce the Codex into such a genome would result in catastrophic cellular degradation, a chain reaction of cancers, necrosis, and uncontrolled energy discharge. The host would dissolve. Izuku's breath hitched. He understood. He understood with a sudden, shocking clarity that was both terrifying and, in a strange way, validating. You mean? He whispered, his eyes wide. You needed someone quirkless, correct? Your genetic makeup is a clean slate. A pure, stable foundation upon which a new legacy could be built. Your greatest perceived social disadvantage was, for our purposes, your most vital biological asset. For his entire life, being quirkless had been a deficiency. A lack. A blank space where power was supposed to be. And now, this ancient alien intelligence was telling him that his blankness was the only reason he was qualified for what, exactly? And the second criterion? He asked, his voice trembling. Psychological. The vessel for the hope of 11 billion souls could not be given to one who would abuse such a legacy. The probe has been passively observing this region for decades, analyzing behavior, searching for a specific profile. It seeks not the strongest, nor the most intelligent, but the most altruistic. One who possesses a selfless, indomitable will to protect others, even at great personal cost. The display shifted again. It showed a grainy, holographic recording. Izuku saw the underpass. He saw the sludge villain. He saw himself, a scrawny, terrified boy, running headfirst into danger to save the person who had tormented him his entire life. Yesterday, during your encounter with the hostile gelatinous life form, you displayed a disregard for your own safety that registered far beyond the established baseline for heroic potential. Your desperate, selfless act will trigger the probe's final activation protocol. While you were unconscious, the bonding process was initiated. The cold dread in his stomach turned to ice. Bonding process? What did you do to me? The Genesis Codex is no longer in this probe, Izuku Midoriya. It has been successfully infused into your DNA. It is a part of you now. Biologically, you are no longer solely human, you are the living library of Krypton. You are its last son, and its entire population. The floor seemed to drop out from under him. He stumbled back, his legs weak, until he hit his bed and collapsed onto it. He looked down at his hands, turning them over and over. They looked the same. The same pale skin, the same freckles, the same slightly crooked finger from when he'd broken it in elementary school. But they weren't. According to the voice in his head, they were now part alien. He was a walking, talking museum for a dead race. No, that's impossible, he muttered, shaking his head. My DNA, you can't just rewrite it. I'd be sick. I'd be different. The process is gradual. It is designed to integrate seamlessly, rewriting dormant sequences, activating latent potentials. Your body is adapting as we speak. Your cells are metabolizing solar radiation from your star at a dramatically increased rate. The first side effects should be manifesting now. As if on cue, the world shifted. It started with a sound. The gentle ticking of his all-might alarm clock on his bedside table suddenly became a deafening clang-clang-clang, each movement of the second hand a hammer blow against his eardrums. He flinched, clamping his hands over his ears. But it didn't help. The sound wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was inside his head, and it was multiplying. He could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, not as a background noise, but as a grinding, mechanical roar. He could hear the drip-drip-drip of a leaky faucet in the bathroom down the hall, each drop hitting the porcelain like a gunshot. Then the sounds from outside his apartment began to pour in. The whisper of the wind became a howling gale. The distant rumble of a passing train was a tectonic-level earthquake. He could hear conversations, dozens of them, hundreds of them, all at once. A couple arguing in the apartment below. A baby crying 3 floors down. A group of teenagers laughing on the street corner. The frantic, terrified heartbeat of a stray cat hiding in the alleyway behind his building. It was a tidal wave of noise, a cacophony of life that crashed over him with physical force. Every sound was at maximum volume, every voice screaming for his attention. There was no filter, no way to focus. It was just everything, all at once. Make it stop! He cried, curling into a ball on his bed, pressing his palms so hard against his ears that his skull ached. It's too loud! It's too loud! Your auditory senses are recalibrating to Kryptonian levels, the voice of Jor-El explained, its tone maddeningly calm amidst the hurricane in Izuku's head. Your brain has not yet learned how to filter the input. You must focus. Isolate a single sound. Your mother's heartbeat, in the next room. Find it. Concentrate on its rhythm. But he couldn't. The roar was too great. It was a physical pain now, a sharp, stabbing pressure behind his eyes. His own frantic heartbeat was a war drum in his chest, adding to the terrifying symphony. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the darkness was filled with the deafening roar of the world. This wasn't a quirk. This was a curse. This was a nightmare. Toshinori Yagi checked his reflection in the darkened window of the taxi. The gaunt, skeletal man who stared back at him felt a million miles away from the beaming symbol of peace. He was running on fumes, but a deep, unfamiliar excitement coursed through him. He had found him. After years of searching, he had found a boy with the heart, the spirit, the sheer, irrational heroism worthy of inheriting one for all. Young Midoriya. A good kid. A little fanatical, but his heart was pure gold. Toshinori felt a paternal pride swell in his chest. He was about to change that boy's life forever, to give him the one thing he had always dreamed of. He clutched the folder in his lap. It contained a detailed nutrition plan and the first phase of his American Dream Plan for cleaning the beach. He wanted to get started right away, to formalize the offer and set the boy on his path. He paid the driver and got out a block away from the Midoriya's apartment building. He preferred to approach on foot. It was humbling. It reminded him of the people he fought to protect. He walked up the concrete steps to the 4th floor, his long limbs feeling awkward and clumsy without the muscle mass of his hero form. He took a deep breath and knocked on apartment 4B. The door opened to reveal a short, plump woman with dark green hair and wide, kind eyes. "Inko Midoriya," she gasped, her eyes immediately filling with tears. "Why, you're All Might!" she stammered, looking at his emaciated form. "From the news, from the sludge villain fight, you saved my Izuku." Tashinori offered a small, practiced smile and a slight bow. "Yagi Tashinori, ma'am. I apologize for the intrusion. I had some things to discuss with your son regarding the incident. May I come in?" Of course. Please." She ushered him inside, bowing repeatedly. Thank you so much. I was so worried." The apartment was small, cozy, and impeccably clean. It smelled faintly of ginger and soy sauce. It felt like a home. "Izuku is in his room," Inko said, wringing her hands. "He's been a little strange ever since yesterday. So much energy. He's been locked in there studying for hours. I'll go get him." "Thank you," Tashinori said. "And please don't worry. He's a fine young man. A very brave one." Inko beamed at the praise, her tears starting anew, before she scurried off towards the hallway. Tashinori heard her knock gently on a door. "Izuku? Honey? You have a visitor." Well, you should see for yourself." There was no response from within the room, only a strange, muffled sound. It sounded like the boy was in pain. Inko knocked again, louder this time. "Izuku? Are you all right?" The muffled sound became a low groan. Tashinori's hero instincts, honed over decades, screamed that something was wrong. He strode down the short hallway, his long legs covering the distance in 2 steps. "Stand back, Mrs. Midoriya," he said, his voice taking on a sliver of its old authority. He didn't wait for permission. He grasped the doorknob and opened the door. The scene that greeted him was not what he expected. He had pictured a room filled with All Might merchandise, the eager face of his chosen successor. The room was indeed a shrine to him, but its occupant was not eager. Izuku Midoriya was huddled in the far corner of the room, curled into a tight fetal position on the floor. His hands were clamped over his ears, his knuckles white. His whole body was trembling, and he was muttering incomprehensibly, his face screwed up in agony. The air in the room was strangely warm, and a low, deep hum seemed to emanate from the boy's desk. But it was the light that made Tashinori freeze. A faint, ethereal glow was emanating from the center of Izuku's chest, shining through the thin fabric of his t-shirt. It was the same golden-white light he had seen on the boy's hand, but stronger now, pulsing in time with his frantic heartbeat. And within that light, he could clearly see the shape of the impossible symbol, the stylized S in its pentagonal shield. It was real. It hadn't been a trick of the light. "Young Midoriya?" Tashinori said, taking a step into the room. Izuku flinched as if he'd been struck. "Too loud!" he gasped out, his voice raw. "Your voice, your lungs, your heart. I can hear it all. Make it stop!" Tashinori's mind raced, trying to connect the dots. The symbol. The sensory agony. The boys claimed that he was quirkless. Quirks didn't just manifest like this at 14, not with this kind of uncontrollable, agonizing power. This was something else. Something alien. He knelt down, moving slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. "What's happening to you, my boy?" he asked, his voice a low, gentle whisper. As he got closer, he saw the object on the desk. A smooth, black crystal that seemed to absorb the light in the room. A soft, holographic image of the glowing crest floated just above it, the source of the hum that filled the air. His eyes darted from the crystal to the glowing symbol on the boy's chest, and then back to the boy's pain-racked face. A horrifying, impossible thought began to form in his mind. The offer of one for all, the dream of a successor, his entire plan for the future, all of it suddenly seemed small and terrifyingly naive. The boy he'd chosen to inherit the sacred torch of humanity's hope wasn't a blank slate waiting for power. He was already a vessel for something else, something ancient, unknown, and powerful beyond his comprehension. Yagi Tashinori, the symbol of peace, looked at the crying boy who was the living key to his own legacy and realized, with a chilling certainty that he knew absolutely nothing about him. The situation wasn't more complex than he'd imagined. It was from an entirely different world. The world inside Izuku Midoriya's head was a roaring, screaming hurricane of unprocessed data. The world outside was a small, quiet bedroom where his mother wept with confusion and the number one hero stood frozen, his skeletal frame casting a long, concerned shadow. Toshinori Yagi had come here to offer a boy his dream. Instead, he had stumbled into a waking nightmare. Young Midoriya! Izuku! Toshinori's voice was a low whisper, but to Izuku, it was a thunderclap that sent a fresh wave of agony through his skull. It's too much! Izuku gasped, pressing himself harder into the corner, as if he could physically force the sensory onslaught out of his body. He could hear the frantic, humming bird-like beat of his mother's heart, the deep, slow, and slightly irregular rhythm of Toshinori's damaged one. He could hear the whisper of dust motes circulating in the air currents of the room. It was torture. Focus, the voice of Jor-El resonated in his mind, a pillar of cold logic in the emotional storm. The human auditory system is primitive. It relies on physical vibration. Yours is now attuned to the quantum resonance of matter itself. You are not merely hearing sound, you are perceiving the universe's raw data stream. You must build a filter. A dam. Block it out. I can't! Izuku whimpered aloud. Toshinori knew he had to take control. He turned to Inko, whose face was a mask of maternal terror. Mrs. Midoriya, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Your son is experiencing a sudden and severe manifestation. It's a reaction to the stress of yesterday. I need to take him somewhere quiet, somewhere we can get this under control. I promise you, I will not let any harm come to him. Inko looked from the haggard, yet sincere, face of the man who had saved her son to the agonizing state of her child. Her trust warred with her fear, but the hero's presence won out. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Please, please help my boy. Getting Izuku out of the apartment was an ordeal. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of clothing, every cough from a neighboring apartment was a fresh assault. The journey down the stairs was a cacophony of a dozen different lives intruding upon his own. In the taxi, it became exponentially worse. The growl of the engine was a physical vibration that rattled his bones. The squeal of the tires on asphalt was a high-frequency shriek. The endless sea of voices and heartbeats from the pedestrians they passed was a crushing, unintelligible roar. He sat in the back seat, head buried in Toshinori's coat, the hero's surprisingly thin frame shielding him as best he could. The Jor-El crystal, which Toshinori had insisted they bring, sat on the seat between them, its low hum a constant, grounding frequency amidst the chaos. The ocean, the AI instructed in his mind. We are approaching a large body of water. Its sound is a constant, a wave of white noise. Isolate it. Focus on the pattern of the waves. Let it become the only thing you hear. Izuku tried. He strained his new, terrifying senses, pushing past the roar of the city, searching for the sound the AI described. He found it. A distant, rhythmic shush crash. It was faint at first, but he clung to it like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. He focused all of his will on that single, repeating pattern. The roar of the city didn't vanish, but it began to recede, like a tide pulling away from the shore, leaving the sound of the waves in its wake. By the time the taxi pulled up to the curb overlooking Dagoba Beach, Izuku was still trembling, but he was no longer screaming. The cacophony had been muted to a manageable, albeit still overwhelming, din. Toshinori paid the driver, who gave the gaunt man and the pale, trembling boy a strange look before speeding off. The night air was cool and heavy with the scent of salt and rust. The moon was a silver disk in the sky, illuminating the mountains of garbage in stark, alien relief. It was a landscape of decay, a graveyard of forgotten things, a fitting place for a conversation about a dead world. Toshinori led Izuku down to a relatively clear patch of sand, far from the road. All right, young man, he said, his voice grave. We need to talk. And I need you to be completely honest with me. What is that thing? He pointed a long, bony finger at the crystal Izuku was now clutching in his hands. Izuku looked down at the object. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, as if in response to Toshinori's question. He took a shaky breath. I don't know if you'll believe me. After what I just witnessed in your room, I am prepared to believe a great many things, Toshinori said, his gaze unwavering. And so, the story came tumbling out. It was a fragmented, stammering narrative, with Izuku explaining what he could and the voice of the Jor-El AI filling in the gaps, its voice emanating clearly from the crystal now, a calm, synthesized baritone that was utterly alien in the salty night air. It spoke of a dying star named Rao, of a planet of impossible science and culture named Krypton. It projected holographic images into the air above the crystal, the breathtaking crystalline spires of Candace City, the strange, majestic creatures that flew in its crimson skies, the faces of its people, so human yet so different. Then, it showed the end. The planetary core collapsing, the ground cracking open to reveal rivers of magma, the sky burning. It was a silent, horrifyingly beautiful apocalypse. Finally, it explained the Genesis Codex. The salvation of a species, encoded into a living data stream. It explained its centuries-long search, its criteria for a host, and its choice. It confirmed that the entirety of this genetic legacy was now intertwined with Izuku Midoriya's own DNA. Toshinori stood in silence for the entire explanation, his face unreadable. He had fought giant robots, battled villains who could level city blocks, and stared death in the face. But this was on a different scale entirely. It was a truth so monumental it threatened to shatter his understanding of the universe. When the crystal fell silent, the only sound was the crashing of the waves. A legacy of a dead world inside you, Toshinori finally said, his voice raspy. He ran a hand through his wild blonde hair. This isn't a quirk. This is something else. Something fundamental. I didn't ask for this, Izuku whispered, tears welling in his eyes again. I just wanted to be a hero. Now I'm a monster. I can hear everything. What's happening to me? You are not a monster, young man, Toshinori said, his voice regaining some of its familiar strength. He looked at Izuku, at the terrified boy who had run into danger for someone else without a moment's hesitation, and his resolve hardened. You are a boy who has been handed a burden of unimaginable weight, but you will not carry it alone. He took a deep breath, the gears in his mind turning. The situation had changed, but the goal had not. This changes things. Drastically. But my offer still stands. The world needs a symbol of peace. It needs a hero who can inspire hope. Your character, your heart, that is why I chose you. This other legacy does not change that. An observation, the Jor-El AI interjected, its voice cutting through the emotional moment. The energy signature of the power you call One for All is unique. It is the quantum-level energy transfer system, stockpiling kinetic and biological energy across generations. It is unprecedented. It is the power that has kept this world safe for decades, Toshinori said defensively. I do not doubt its efficacy. I am merely analyzing the potential consequences of its introduction into this vessel, the AI stated. Izuku Midoriya's body is currently undergoing a complete cellular restructuring to become a biological solar battery, capable of channeling vast amounts of stellar radiation. One for All is a raging, internal sun. You are proposing to place a second star into a sky that was only ever meant to hold one. The metaphor hung in the air, chilling and precise. Toshinori's face grew grim. He understood the stakes perfectly. What would happen? The potential outcomes are varied. Best case scenario, the energies achieve a stable symbiosis, creating a hybrid power source of unimaginable potential. The energy of One for All could act as a catalyst, accelerating the vessel's adaptation to his Kryptonian physiology, and granting him conscious control far sooner than his natural development would allow. And the worst-case scenario? Izuku asked, his voice barely audible. Catastrophic cellular fission, the AI replied, its tone devoid of emotion. Your body, unable to contain two conflicting, godlike energies, would be torn apart atom by atom. The resulting energy release would be considerable. Equivalent to a low-yield thermonuclear device. Izuku swayed on his feet, his face paling to a ghostly white. He wouldn't just die. He would explode. He would become a bomb that could wipe out a part of the city. Toshinori placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. He looked from Izuku's terrified face to the humming crystal. The path forward had suddenly become a razor's edge, with heroism on one side and catastrophic annihilation on the other. For a moment, he considered retracting his offer. It was the safe thing to do, the responsible thing. He could find another successor, one who was just an ordinary, quirkless boy. But then he looked into Izuku's eyes. He saw the fire that had been there since the beginning, now banked by fear but not extinguished. He saw the boy who had already accepted one impossible burden, and he knew. Giving up was not an option. Not for Izuku, and not for him. It has to be your choice, young man, Tashinori said, his voice heavy. I chose you to be my successor. I still believe you are the right choice. But I will not force this risk upon you. You can walk away now, learn to control this Kryptonian power on your own, and no one would blame you. Izuku looked out at the ocean, at the endless expanse of dark water under the moonlight. He thought about the life he'd had, one of quiet desperation, of notebooks filled with dreams he could never reach. Then he thought of the life being offered, a chance to be the hero he always wanted to be, but with a risk that could vaporize him and everyone around him. And then he thought of the third life, the one thrust upon him, the weight of 11 billion silent souls resting within his own. He couldn't turn back. He couldn't stand still. The only way was forward. He turned to Tashinori, his expression hardening with a resolve that seemed to age him by years. I'll do it, he said, his voice clear and steady for the first time that night. I accept. I'll inherit one for all. And I'll learn to control both. I'll be their hero. He gestured to the dark city behind them. And I'll honor their legacy. He looked down at the crystal in his hands. A slow, proud smile spread across Tashinori's face. I knew you'd say that, he said. All right then. Our training plan is about to get a lot more complicated. Welcome, young Midoriya, to the hardest 10 months of your life. And so, his life split in two. By day, he was Tashinori Yagi's student. The plan was simple, brutal, and effective: clean the entire beach. Every last refrigerator, every tangled fishing net, every broken television. It was backbreaking, Sisyphean labor designed to turn his scrawny, unassuming frame into a vessel capable of containing a hurricane. The first few weeks were hell. His muscles screamed in protest. Every morning he woke up feeling like he'd been run over by a truck. Tashinori was a relentless taskmaster, pushing him past his limits, and then pushing him further. Imagine the egg in the microwave! He would shout as Izuku struggled to haul a rusted-out car engine across the sand. Your body is the egg. If you pour the sheer power of one for all into it without tempering it first, you'll explode. Now lift, and Izuku would lift. He'd haul and drag and push, his sweat mingling with the grime and rust of a decade of neglect. He was slowly, painfully, building the vessel. But every night, his training took on a different, stranger dimension. When the sun went down, his lessons with the ghost of Krypton began. Under the guidance of the Jor-El AI, he would sit cross-legged on the now-clearing sand, the crystal resting before him, and he would meditate. The goal was to build the filters, the mental dams the AI had spoken of. The world is a symphony, the AI would instruct, its voice a calm counterpoint to the city's distant roar. You are merely hearing it without a conductor. You must become the conductor. Start small. Find the sound of the waves. Isolate it. Now, find the sound of the wind moving through that mountain of trash. Hold both sounds separate but distinct. Now, add a third, the sound of your own breathing. Night after night he practiced this. He learned to compartmentalize the flood of auditory data, to raise and lower the volume of the world at will. He learned to pinpoint a single conversation from 10 blocks away, or to tune everything out until all he could hear was the steady, reassuring beat of his own heart. Then came the visual training. His eyesight was sharpening at an alarming rate. He could see the individual feathers on a seagull from a mile away. But with this new acuity came other, stranger abilities. Your eyes are not merely lenses. They are conduits for solar energy, the AI explained one evening. You can perceive the entirety of the electromagnetic spectrum. You must learn control, or you will inadvertently release that energy in a destructive beam. The training was terrifyingly delicate. He would be instructed to focus on a single grain of sand. First, he was to see it in detail. Then, he was to push his vision further, past the surface, to see the crystalline lattice of the silicon dioxide within. His first, shaky foray into what the AI called X-ray vision. He had to learn to perceive this without getting lost in the dizzying complexity of the atomic world, and most importantly, without heating the grain of sand until it turned to glass. The most profound and burdensome part of his nightly training, however, was the history lessons. The AI would project its holograms, not of science or battle, but of life. He was shown codex echoes, sensory recordings from the lives of the people he now carried. He experienced the joy of a Kryptonian child taking its first flight under the crimson sun. He felt the quiet satisfaction of a scientist as she put the finishing touches on a revolutionary piece of architecture. He sat in on a family meal, listening to the gentle, musical cadence of the Kryptonian language, understanding it not with his ears, but with a deep, instinctual part of himself. He felt their love, their ambition, their art, their peace. And then, the AI would show him the end. He would be shown fragments of the planet's last days. The panic in the streets. The terror of families huddled together as the world tore itself apart. The profound, soul-crushing grief of Jor-El and his wife, Lara, as they placed their only son, Kal-El, into a tiny ship and sent him off into the void, a final, desperate message of hope to a universe that would never know their name. Izuku would often end these sessions weeping on the sand, not for himself, but for the 11 billion ghosts who lived inside him. It was a grief so vast it threatened to swallow him whole, but it also forged something new within him. His desire to be a hero was no longer just a childhood dream. It was a sacred duty. He wasn't just fighting for the living, he was fighting to honor the dead. Months bled into one another. His body hardened, his muscles cording under his skin. The mountains of trash on the beach shrank, replaced by growing expanses of clean, golden sand. His control over his senses became second nature. He could walk through a crowded mall and hear only what he wanted to hear. His two legacies were beginning to coexist. But they had never truly touched. That changed in the 8th month of his training. He was exhausted. It had been a grueling day, focused on clearing the final, most densely packed section of the beach. He was faced with a massive, industrial-grade refrigerator, half buried in the sand and fused with rust to other pieces of metal. It was a monolithic beast of steel and decay. "This is your final exam for today, young Midoriya," Toshinori called out from his perch on a cleared pile of scrap. "Move this, and we'll call it a day." Izuku squared up to the fridge. He dug his feet into the sand, gripped the rusted edge, and pulled. Nothing. He grunted, putting his entire body into it, his muscles screaming. The fridge didn't budge a millimeter. He tried again, and again, his frustration mounting with each failed attempt. "I can't," he gasped, his arms trembling with exhaustion. "Can't is not in a hero's vocabulary," Toshinori chided. "Dig deeper," Izuku yelled in frustration, a raw, angry sound. He was so tired of being weak. Even after all this, he was still just scrawny Deku, unable to move a piece of junk. All Might's words, Bakugo's sneering face, his own feelings of inadequacy, it all boiled over in a single, volcanic moment of rage. He reared back his fist. He wasn't thinking. He was just feeling. He wanted to destroy this monument to his own weakness. He channeled that feeling into his fist, and for the first time, he reached for the budding power he had been so carefully taught to ignore. He reached for one for all. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was instinct. He pulled on just a tiny, infinitesimal spark of that stockpiled power, a single green ember in the furnace of his body. The moment he did, something new happened. His Kryptonian cells, now hyper-efficient solar batteries, registered the sudden, massive influx of internal bioenergy. They did what they were designed to do, they absorbed it, amplified it, and channeled it. The green spark of one for all ignited a golden fire of Kryptonian solar energy. The two powers, kept so carefully separate for months, finally collided. Izuku's fist shot forward. There was a flicker of emerald lightning around his arm, instantly swallowed by an incandescent, ruby-red glow that flared from his skin. The air in front of his knuckles did not crackle, it sizzled. His fist connected with the refrigerator. The sound was not a metallic crunch or a dull thud. It was a high-frequency, ear-splitting VSHHHING sound, like superheated gas escaping a valve. A blinding flash of red and green light erupted from the point of impact, forcing Tashinori to shield his eyes. When the light faded, the refrigerator was gone, not broken, not shattered, not blown apart. It was simply gone. In its place, the sand had been fused into a perfect circle of dark, gleaming glass. A few wisps of incandescent vapor, the last mortal remains of a quarter-ton of steel and plastic, drifted away on the sea breeze. Izuku stared at his hand, which was completely unharmed. Then, the backlash hit him. It wasn't the clean, sharp pain of a broken bone that Tashinori had warned him about. It was 1,000 times worse. An agonizing, searing fire erupted in his arm and spread through his entire nervous system. It felt like every single cell in his body was being torn apart and forcibly stitched back together. Warning! Uncontrolled bioenergy cascade. Jor-El's voice screamed in his head, filled with a digital panic he had never heard before. One for All's kinetic output is creating a positive feedback loop with your solar metabolism. Cellular integrity is failing. Purge the excess energy. Now! Izuku collapsed to the sand, screaming, his body convulsing as waves of raw, untamed power coursed through him. Red and green energy flickered erratically across his skin. Tashinori was by his side in an instant, his face a mask of horror. He had seen the destructive power of One for All in an unprepared vessel, but this was something else entirely. This was self-immolation on a cellular level. Fight it, my boy! Tashinori yelled, helpless. Get it under control! Izuku, writhing in agony, barely heard him. He was drowning in a sea of fire. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that if he didn't stop it, the AI's worst-case prediction would come true. He was going to detonate. He fought back. Using the mental discipline Jor-El had drilled into him for months, he built a dam. Not against sound this time, but against the raging river of power inside him. He focused, pushing past the pain, and visualized the energy. He saw the green and red storm in his mind, and he began to push it down, to compress it, to smother it with his will. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Slowly, painstakingly, the flickering lights on his skin subsided. The agonizing, cellular fire cooled to a bearable, burning throb. He lay on the glassy sand, gasping, drenched in sweat, his entire body trembling from the strain. He had survived. But the message was clear. This was the power he now wielded. Not one legacy, but two. And their fusion was not a simple addition. It was an explosive, alchemical reaction that could either make him the greatest hero the world had ever known, or erase him from existence in a blaze of glory. The final 2 months passed in a blur of hypervigilant training. The beach was cleared, every last scrap. On the morning of the UA entrance exam, Izuku stood with Tashinori on the pristine shoreline, watching the sun rise over the ocean. He had done it. His body was lean, hard, and ready. Tashinori, in his muscle form, beamed with pride. Incredible work, young Midoriya! You did it! You are a worthy vessel! He then plucked a single strand of his golden hair. Now, he said, his voice filled with reverence. For the final step. The transfer. He held out the hair to Izuku. Eat this. Izuku stared at the hair, then at All Might's earnest face. Ha! After the bizarre, anticlimactic meal, Izuku stood, waiting for the power to hit him. Nothing happened. It'll take a few hours to digest, my boy. All Might laughed. Now go! Your future is waiting. Go and show them what a hero looks like. Izuku ran, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. As he approached the gates of UA High, he felt it. A warm glow spreading from his stomach. It wasn't the searing, agonizing fire from the beach. It was a gentle, welcoming warmth, a feeling of immense power settling into its new home. But as the DNA from All Might's hair was fully absorbed, as the key turned the lock and the full, stockpiled might of One for All began to flood his system, the other legacy within him awoke. Primary power source detected. Initiating genetic fusion protocol. The calm, welcoming warmth erupted into a supernova. Izuku stumbled, crying out as he fell to his knees just outside the school gates. His vision exploded in a flash of white light. He felt two universes colliding inside his very being. Green lightning, the raw, kinetic power of 8 generations of heroes, crackled across his skin. Simultaneously, a golden-red fire, the solar heritage of Krypton, burned within his cells, meeting the new power head-on. Warning! Warning! Jor-El's voice was a frantic siren in his mind. Unprecedented energy fusion occurring. Genetic markers destabilizing. Quantum energy entanglement is reaching critical levels. Containment failing. Izuku's body began to convulse violently. A brilliant, terrifying light, a fusion of emerald green and golden red, poured from his eyes and mouth. He was no longer a boy. He was a crucible. He was the battleground where two of the most powerful forces in the universe were meeting for the very first time, and the battle threatened to tear him apart before he could even take his first step on the path to becoming a hero. The world, which had been a screaming, deafening symphony, went white. The two nascent gods of energy that had been wrestling for the throne of his soul did not declare a truce. They fused into a single, terrifying, and utterly unstable entity. Izuku Midoriya was no longer the vessel for two separate powers. He was the epicenter of their violent, glorious birth. Critical fusion event imminent. Jor-El's voice was no longer a calm guide. It was a blaring, system-wide alarm inside his skull. Biological and exotic energies are achieving quantum entanglement. Structural integrity at 40% and falling. He was on his knees at the gates of his dream, and he was coming apart at the seams. A halo of emerald lightning and ruby light pulsed around him, making the pavement beneath him crackle. A few early arriving students stopped and stared, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. They saw a boy bathed in an impossible aura, his body convulsing as if he were being electrocuted. "Hey, is that kid okay?" one whispered. "Is that his quirk? It looks like it's killing him." Another hissed. Izuku barely heard them. Their voices were just more fuel for the sensory firestorm. The two legacies were tearing him apart. One for all, the accumulated will of 8 heroes, was a roaring kinetic engine demanding release. The Kryptonian power, a quiet and fathomless ocean of solar potential, was a reactive force, absorbing and amplifying the kinetic energy into something far more volatile. He was going to fail. He was going to explode or pass out or both, right here on the sidewalk, before he ever set foot inside UA. The thought was so unbearable, so pathetic, that it cut through the pain. No. The word was a silent, desperate scream in his own mind. I will not fail here. He drew on the one tool he had been given that was not a raw, untamed power, his discipline. For months, Jor-El had taught him to build dams, to create filters, to become the conductor of the symphony. He had done it with sound. He had done it with sight. Now, he had to do it with his own soul. He squeezed his eyes shut and focused inward, past the agony, past the blinding light. He visualized the two energies as the AI had described them, a raging, green internal sun, and a deep, red, gravitational ocean. They were not at war. They were unbalanced. He focused his will, not on separating them, but on containing them. He imagined building a wall, a crucible of sheer determination, around the fusing energies. He imagined forcing them into a state of equilibrium, a fragile, temporary truce. The convulsion lessened. The blinding aura around him dimmed, shrinking back until it was a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer under his skin. He took a ragged, shuddering breath, the air burning in his lungs. He was drenched in sweat, his muscles trembling with a deep, cellular exhaustion he had never known. But he was whole. He was standing. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs shaking. The fusion wasn't over. The power was still there, a slumbering, coiling dragon in the pit of his stomach. He was a walking, talking bomb with a faulty trigger, and he was about to walk into a high-stress, combat-oriented examination. He took one step, then another, joining the stream of hopeful students pouring into the massive UA campus. No one seemed to notice him now. He was just another nervous examinee, but inside, he was a battlefield. The written portion of the exam was its own special kind of hell. In the vast, silent examination hall, his newly recalibrated senses were a curse. He could hear the frantic, accelerated heartbeat of the girl 2 rows behind him. He could hear the nervous, rhythmic tapping of a boy's pencil 5 tables away. He could hear the almost imperceptible scratch of graphite on paper from every single student in the room, 100 tiny sounds that threatened to merge into a single, maddening hiss. He had to actively work to tune it all out, to force the world into a muffled quiet so he could focus on the questions in front of him. He finished with minutes to spare, his head throbbing from the sheer mental effort of maintaining his sensory filters. He filed out with the rest of the students, his gaze fixed on the floor, trying to remain an island of calm in a sea of anxious chatter. They were herded into a colossal auditorium. The lights were dim, the air thick with anticipation. On the stage, a single spotlight flared to life, revealing the ridiculously tall, blonde hair and leather-clad form of the voice hero, Present Mike. "What's up, UA candidates? Welcome to today's live performance." The sound wave hit Izuku like a physical blow. It wasn't just loud. It was a pressure front of pure sonic energy that made the fillings in his teeth vibrate and sent a spike of white-hot pain from his temples to the base of his skull. He flinched violently, clapping his hands over his ears, a low groan escaping his lips. His newly formed mental filters, already strained, nearly shattered. He had to frantically reinforce them, focusing all his will on turning the hero's booming voice into a manageable, distant rumble. Present Mike launched into his explanation of the practical exam, his voice a weaponized assault of enthusiasm. Izuku struggled to keep up, his focus split between deciphering the rules and keeping his own senses from tearing him apart. 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point robots. A simple objective: get points by destroying them. Then, a tall, serious-looking boy with engines in his calves stood up, his hand chopping the air with formal precision. "Excuse me. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a great shame for a prestigious institution such as UA." He then turned, pointing a rigid finger directly at Izuku. "And you, with the curly hair, you have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. If you are not going to take this seriously, then you should leave." Izuku froze, a deer in the headlights. He hadn't even realized he'd been making noise. The low groans of pain from Present Mick's voice, the slight tremors from his struggle to contain his power. To this other boy, it looked like disrespect. He wanted to apologize, to explain, but his mouth wouldn't work. He was using every ounce of his concentration just to keep from screaming. He simply bowed his head in shame, clamping his mouth shut. Present Mike brushed off the interruption, explaining that the 4th villain type was a 0-point obstacle, an arena trap to be avoided. A gimmick. The lights came up, and the students were dismissed to their designated battle centers. As they filed out, Izuku felt a profound sense of dread. How was he supposed to fight robots when the voice of the announcer was enough to nearly incapacitate him? How could he wield a power that threatened to atomize him with every use? For the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced his resolve. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe the fusion of these 2 legacies had made him not a hero, but a liability. He stood before the towering gates of Battle Center B, the other examinees stretching and psyching themselves up. He saw the brown-haired girl with the kind face from the school entrance. He started to walk over to thank her for trying to share her points on the written exam. Or had he imagined that? But the serious boy with the engine stopped him. "She appears to be trying to focus. What are you doing here? Are you trying to interfere with the other candidates?" "And no, of course not, I just..." Izuku stammered, but it was too late. "All right, begin." Present Mick's voice roared from unseen speakers. The massive gates slid open. "What's wrong?" The test started. "Run! Run!" While Izuku was still processing the sudden start, the other students exploded from the gate, a flood of quirks and ambition. He was left in their dust, standing alone at the entrance. He shook himself from his stupor and sprinted into the mock city, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sensory chaos of the city was 10 times worse than the auditorium. The air was filled with the sounds of explosions, the grinding of metal, the triumphant shouts of his competitors, and the deep, resonant hum of the robot's internal power sources. His vision swam. When he looked at a building, he didn't just see concrete and glass. He saw the rebar skeleton within, the electrical wiring snaking through the walls, the plumbing like a circulatory system. He rounded a corner, and came face to face with a one-point robot. It was a sleek, green machine on a single tread, its red optical sensor swiveling to lock onto him. This was it. His first test. He squared his shoulders, planting his feet. Okay. Don't use one for all. Not yet. Just regular strength. He knew from his training that his baseline physical power had increased dramatically. He dodged the robot's lunge and threw a punch, aiming for its head. His fist connected with a loud clang. The robot's head was dented, its optical sensor cracked, but it was still functional. It swiped at him with a metallic claw, forcing him to leap back. Inefficient, Jor-El's voice stated calmly in his mind. The chassis is composed of a reinforced titanium alloy. Brute force against the exterior is a low-percentage strategy. The primary power conduit is located at the base of the central torso, behind 3.7 centimeters of armor. As the AI spoke, Izuku's vision automatically shifted. He saw through the metal plating, a glowing, blue schematic of the robot's interior laid over the real thing. He saw the power conduit exactly where Jor-El said it was. The robot charged again. Izuku dodged, and this time, he punched with purpose, aiming for the spot the AI had indicated. His fist slammed into the metal. The armor buckled, but didn't break. It wasn't enough. He was stronger, but not strong enough. While he was struggling with a single one-pointer, a boy with laser beams shooting from his navel zipped past, cleanly disabling 3 robots in as many seconds. A girl with pink skin created a wave of acid that melted the treads off 2 more. Points were being scored all around him, and he was still stuck at 0, fighting a battle of attrition with the weakest enemy on the field. Panic began to set in. He was falling behind. He was going to fail. He had to use that power. The fused, terrifying power coiling in his gut. He backed away from the one-pointer, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Okay. Just a little. Like at the beach, but less. Control it. He took a deep breath, reached inward, and pulled on that spark of one for all. The reaction was instantaneous. The green lightning flared to life around his arm, and the ruby fire of his Kryptonian cells roared in response. The power felt like a wild horse trying to throw him. Focus the energy output to 1.8% of maximum potential, the AI instructed, its voice a lifeline of logic. Channel it through your knuckles. Do not release it as a concussive blast. Release it as a thermal lance. Izuku didn't fully understand, but he obeyed. He focused on the feeling of heat, not force. He lunged forward, his fist glowing with a terrifying, red-green light. He didn't punch the robot. He touched it. His glowing knuckles made contact with the robot's chest plate. There was no impact. Instead, a sound like a high-pressure hiss filled the air. The reinforced titanium alloy didn't shatter. It turned cherry red, then white-hot, then simply melted, slagging away like wax. He pushed his hand through the molten opening and tapped the power conduit. The robot's red eye flickered and died. It slumped to the ground, a perfectly circular, molten hole in its chest. Izuku stared at his hand. It was completely unharmed, though his entire arm throbbed with a dull, residual heat. He had done it. He had controlled the fusion. It was a clumsy, terrifying process, but it worked. 1 point. He spent the next several minutes in a frantic, desperate hunt. He was far behind the other students, who had already cleared out the main thoroughfares. He had to duck into alleys and side streets, picking off the stragglers. Each takedown was the same harrowing process. Reach for the power, feel the agonizing surge as the 2 energies fought for dominance, listen to Jor-El's frantic calculations, and then channel the resulting energy into a controlled, thermal touch that melted through the robot's armor. He managed to disable a 2-pointer, then another 1-pointer, and finally a 3-pointer that he ambushed from above. Each victory left him more drained, the strain of containing the fusion a greater tax than the physical exertion. He had 7 points. It was a pathetic score, almost certainly not enough to pass. The minutes were ticking away. Despair began to creep in, cold and sharp. All that training, all that pain, for nothing. And then the ground began to shake. A shadow fell over the entire street. From between the buildings, a behemoth rose. It was the 0-pointer. Taller than the highest skyscraper, a mountain of dark green metal and churning gears. Its single, massive red eye scanned the cityscape, and the other examinees, who had been fighting with such confidence moments before, were now screaming and running in terror. "It's the gimmick! Run away! You'd have to be insane to fight that thing." They were right. It was an insurmountable obstacle, a force of nature designed to be fled from. Izuku, his body trembling with exhaustion and power overload, turned to run with them. That's when he heard it. A cry of pain. He whipped his head around. Near the base of the colossal robot, pinned under a large slab of concrete from a building the machine had clipped, was the kind, brown-haired girl. Her leg was trapped. She was looking up at the approaching robot, her face pale with terror. In that instant, everything else ceased to exist. The roar of the city, the shouts of the other students, the throbbing pain in his body, the fear of his own unstable power, the crushing weight of his imminent failure, it all vanished. The internal storm of sensory data went utterly silent. The two warring legacies within him stopped fighting. For the first time, they focused on a single, unified purpose. Save her. It was the same instinct that had sent him running toward the sludge villain to save Bakugo. It was the core of his being, the absolute, non-negotiable truth of who he was. He didn't think. He acted. He crouched low, his eyes fixed on the zero-pointer's massive head, 100 meters in the air. Objective, neutralized threat, Jor-El's voice stated in his mind, no longer panicked but crisp and tactical. Target, primary processing unit, located in the cranial housing. Standard kinetic assault is insufficient. A focused, high-energy impact is required. The energy fusion is your only viable weapon. Channel one for all into your legs. All of it. Izuku didn't hesitate. He poured every ounce of the stockpiled power he could access into his legs. The green lightning exploded around him, thicker and more violent than ever before. The concrete beneath his feet cracked and splintered under the sheer energy pressure. The ruby glow of his Kryptonian heritage flared in his cells, absorbing the kinetic torrent and converting it, not into unstable heat, but into pure, explosive propulsion. He leaped. It was not a jump. It was a launch. He shot into the air like a cannonball, a comet of green and red, leaving a spider web of craters in the pavement behind him. He soared skyward, the wind screaming past his ears, the ground shrinking rapidly below. He was rocketing towards the zero-pointer's face. The robot's massive optical sensor locked onto him, a threat analysis subroutine identifying the tiny, fast-approaching object. Now the arm. Jor-El commanded. Replicate the energy cascade. But this time, do not release it as thermal energy. Contain it. Focus it into a single, kinetic point. The power is a key, not a blowtorch. I will guide your vision. Target the master servomotor behind the primary optical lens. Izuku's vision shifted. The world became a translucent, wireframe schematic. He saw through the zero-pointer's armored faceplate, his gaze locking onto a complex, glowing gyroscope at the center of its head, the master control unit. He drew his right arm back. One for all, and the power of the sun flooded the limb. It felt like his arm was going to be ripped from its socket, but he held on, his teeth gritted in a feral snarl. The green lightning and red fire swirled together, contained by his sheer will, turning his fist into a miniature, contained star. He was no longer a boy. He was a weapon forged from the legacy of two worlds. He flew past the robot's emotionless face, his fist lashing out. Smash! His fist, glowing like the heart of a forge, connected with the robot's head. There wasn't a deafening boom. There was a sharp, piercing crack like the universe itself had fractured, followed by a sound like a giant tuning fork being struck. A shockwave of pure, ruby-red energy, visible even in the bright daylight, erupted from the point of impact. It wasn't an explosion that blew outward. It was an implosion that drove inward. The metal around his fist didn't just buckle, it flowed, warping and twisting as it was superheated and hypercompressed in the same instant. The robot's armored head caved in like foil. He felt the bones in his arm and both of his legs shatter, the price of wielding such impossible power. The force of the impact sent him tumbling backward into the empty sky, his body suddenly limp and useless. Below him, the zero-pointer froze. Its massive red eye flickered. A wisp of black smoke curled from the perfectly circular, molten crater where its face used to be. Then, with a deep, groaning screech of tortured metal, the giant slumped forward, its head collapsing into its own chest before it began a slow, majestic, and utterly silent topple. Izuku was falling. The sky spun around him. I did it, he thought, a sense of weary triumph washing over him. I saved her. But my score is still 7 points. I failed. The thought was strangely distant, unimportant. He closed his eyes, accepting the inevitable impact. He never hit the ground. A gentle slap to his cheek stopped his descent. He opened his eyes to see the kind-faced girl, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her hand outstretched. She had used her quirk to make him weightless just before he hit the pavement. Release! She cried, tapping her fingers together. He fell the last few feet with a soft thump. Then, the end of exam buzzer blared across the silent, debris-strewn city. It was over. In a darkened control room deep within UA, a bank of monitors displayed feeds from every battle center. Pro heroes like Cementos, Ectoplasm, and Snipe observed the results. At the center of the room, a man with tired eyes, wrapped in bandages like a mummy, sat hunched over a specific set of data screens. Shota Aizawa, also known as Eraserhead, rewound the footage from Battle Center B. He watched the green-haired boy's final attack again, this time with the energy analysis suite running. Reckless, he muttered, his voice a dry rasp. A self-destructive quirk. He broke 3 limbs to take down 1 opponent. He'd be useless in a protracted fight. A liability. He was about to write the boy off, to mark him as a zero-potential candidate with a flashy but impractical power, when a secondary monitor beeped, flagging an anomaly. Aizawa's tired eyes narrowed. The screen displayed the energy signature from Izuku Midoriya's final punch. The kinetic output was immense, far exceeding that of most first-year students, but that wasn't the anomaly. Layered on top of the kinetic reading was something else. A complex, multi-layered signature that the system was struggling to classify. What is this? He murmured, pulling the data to his main screen. There was a massive thermal spike, consistent with temperatures found on the surface of a star, but it was contained within an impossibly small area. There was a radiological reading, a burst of exotic particles that left no residual radiation but had a signature unlike any known element. It wasn't fire. It wasn't electricity. It wasn't plasma. It looked less like a quirk and more like a contained astrophysical event. Aizawa pulled up Midoriya's file. Quirk, unregistered. Medical history quirkless, he scoffed. A lie, obviously. A late bloomer with a powerful, uncontrollable enhancement quirk. It happened. But it didn't explain the energy readings. No strength enhancer quirk on record produced thermal and radiological signatures like that. It was alien. He watched the footage one last time, slowing it down to a frame-by-frame crawl. He saw the flicker of green lightning he associated with enhancement quirks, but for a single frame, just before impact, he saw it wrapped in a sheath of deep red light, a color that seemed to bend the air around the boy's fist. Aizawa leaned back, his expression grim. This wasn't a simple, reckless kid. This was a mystery. An unknown variable with the power to melt a 50-ton robot from the inside out. A power he had absolutely no control over. He typed a command, flagging Izuku Midoriya's file with a high priority, level 1 security alert. Subject, Izuku Midoriya. Status, unstable power signature. Potential threat level, unknown. Recommend continuous observation. He didn't know what this boy was. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was the most dangerous student to ever apply to UA High. In the pristine white of the UA infirmary, Recovery Girl pressed her lips to Izuku's forehead. The familiar, gentle energy of her quirk flowed into him. She expected the usual process. Her power would amplify his natural healing abilities, and the shattered bones would slowly knit themselves back together over the course of several hours. What happened instead made her gasp and pull back. The moment her quirk activated his body's own healing factor, it was like pouring gasoline on a bonfire. His cells, already saturated with solar energy and primed for regeneration by his Kryptonian DNA, went into overdrive. She could almost feel the process. Under her medically trained gaze, she could see the faint bruising around his broken limbs fading in real time. She could hear the faint, almost imperceptible grating sound of fractured bone ends pulling themselves back into alignment with unnatural speed. His cells weren't just being stimulated. They were aggressively, ravenously rebuilding themselves, drinking in the light from the infirmary lamps like a thirsty plant. My word! She breathed, her eyes wide with scientific shock. What kind of life force is this? What should have taken all day and left him completely drained was over in less than 10 minutes. He was still exhausted, but his bones were completely healed. She ran a quick diagnostic, her own clerk telling her that his cellular structure was abnormal. It was denser, more efficient, and radiated a faint, unfamiliar energy. She looked down at the sleeping boy, the one who had arrived as a broken mess and had regenerated like some kind of mythical creature. Like Aizawa, she made a note in his file, a quiet, professional observation that hid a deep well of confusion and concern. Subject exhibits unprecedented regenerative capabilities. Cellular response to healing stimuli is abnormally aggressive. Further biological analysis required. Izuku Midoriya had passed his entrance exam. But in doing so, he had traded his anonymity for the intense, analytical scrutiny of his future teachers. He had proven he had the heart of a hero, but he had also revealed the power of a monster. His life at UA would not be the triumphant dream he had imagined. It would be a trial by fire. It would be a crucible.